Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm here with another video, and this one's going to be a walkthrough process of this portrait of my character called Fiona. I'm also happy to announce that this video is sponsored by Skillshare, and I will tell you guys about Skillshare later on in the video. So I apologize for taking so long to upload a new video. I've been a little bit behind, lagging on my schedule, and I also recently found out that my computer is like basically obsolete, so I had to take several days out of my schedule to kind of put together a new computer, and thankfully now it will significantly improve my process for putting out videos, so I'm very excited about that. So this video is going to be mostly focusing on the lighting slash shadows, because in this particular piece I put a lot more effort into that one aspect of it. So I wanted to give you guys a more in-depth explanation of how I approach it, and just quickly give you some tips that I utilize over the years of trying different types of rendering slash painting, or whatever you might want to call it. So in this portrait I started it the way that I do with anything else, typically doing one rough sketch and then doing a second cleaner version of it. The reason why I do this is because even though I technically could use the first sketch and just go straight into inking, I've noticed over the years that it's actually a lot faster for me to just do it one more time, which may seem counterintuitive because it's an extra step, but it honestly makes a pretty big difference if I just clean up the sketch one more time, which I can do relatively quickly because I still don't have to worry about having the lines be perfect, but it inevitably ends up a lot cleaner than the first sketch, and then I move on to inking, and at that point it's very, very straightforward and quick as a result. So yeah, in this video I wanted to focus on telling you why I even bother to ink at all, when, as you can see, the end result of my paintings when they are like this is, I mean, you can still definitely see the line art, but there's also a lot of paint over, and it doesn't look like a typical line art heavy type of piece, in my opinion anyways. I mean, I know that everyone probably sees it a little bit differently, but to me it is more like a little bit toward painting, more so than just cell shading, which is typically associated with a line art heavy artwork. So the reason why I still choose to do line art with a painting like this is because I think it helps me a lot to stay on point with my original intention. So I'll explain a little bit more about that. Basically, I have tried a few times before to do a more lineless painting type of approach, and although it does create a more interesting and painterly result, I usually notice that I tend to lose the original sketch, or the energy of the original sketch, or the features of the characters, something like that. It's especially important to me because I don't often paint random things or random people, and I'm generally trying to capture a likeness of characters that I already exist to me, and I do have a pretty clear idea in my head of what they're supposed to look like. So any deviation from their intended vibe really bothers me, and I found that with lineless painting it is so easy to lose the essence, because with every stroke not being constrained by the lines, it ever so slightly changes the facial features, and thus you end up with a person that looks slightly different, and I found that like pretty annoying for me. So I decided to just try inking like I always do, and the whole point of inking for me is pretty much to just really solidify the shapes and the flow of the piece. So I know that some people work in a similar way with the lasso tool in Photoshop, where they select certain areas and then leave them on a separate layer. That's a way to also solidify shapes, and they constrain, like lock the pixels to make sure that they don't go out of that shape. That's not something I've ever tried before, but I feel like it's just a combination of me really disliking too many layers. So the idea that I would have to have a different layer for every single shape, especially when shapes overlap, becomes quite daunting. So I found that the easiest thing for me to do is honestly just ink it, and that way I can see the shapes very clearly, and then the lines will help me constrain the entire process of the painting until the very last step where I paint over. But by that time it's just small details, so generally I can very easily preserve the look that I was going for initially, and that is why I take the extra step of cleaning up the sketch, even if it's relatively clean, with line work. And I have also done this before with using much thinner lines, but I found that it actually took forever to do that. The thinner the lines, I find, the more difficult it is to keep the line work sufficiently clean. But it was kind of worth it. The piece I'm talking about right now, with like the thinnest line work that I've ever had, was actually the cover photo that you see on my YouTube channel currently, and I still have all the footage of that. I'm just trying to figure out what the best way to use that footage is, because I was considering maybe making a full length, like long tutorial, maybe even like a class for Skillshare, which actually reminds me about this video's sponsor. If you haven't tried Skillshare before, I highly recommend that you take a look. It's an online learning platform where you can find thousands of classes and huge selection of topics such as drawing, painting, writing, art journaling, business, freelance, and a ton more. Honestly, too many to list, so there's definitely a ton of classes you can check out. Skillshare is a platform made by and for lifelong learners and creatives looking to explore their pool of knowledge or simply try a new hobby. I actually currently have a class on Skillshare called Character Illustration, Create a Character with Photoshop and Watercolor. In this class, I give you a detailed overview of my entire process from scratch, which seamlessly combines both digital and traditional media. You can watch this class and hundreds of others on Skillshare by clicking the link in my description and signing up for a free trial. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Skillshare has no ads and costs less than $10 per month with an annual subscription, and I love that most of the classes are about an hour, so it's super easy to fit into a busy schedule. If you use my link to sign up, you'll be helping me out as well, so please check it out in my description box below. And now back to my video. Alright, so now that I've explained to you guys why I still put a lot of time into the inking stage of this drawing and why I do it in the first place to solidify the shapes, I also just wanted to mention that the reason why the shapes and the hair are super crazy is because this character, Fiona, he does cut his own hair, and even though I was trying really hard to make it seem random and messy, I guess it's still kind of unclear that it's super weird, and it looks kind of neat in the end, which is actually something that I have issues with. Like, I have excessive organization issues, so it's very hard for me to make art that looks super messy. Yeah, I mean, it's not the worst problem to have, so moving on, just thought I'd point out that the idea was that he cuts his own hair. But yeah, so the rest of it is pretty simple. I swiftly move on to the next step, which is masking out the silhouette and putting down the flat local colors. And as per usual, I changed the color of the line art. So as you can see, it's significantly less harsh looking and kind of starts to blend into the local colors. So that's why the end product doesn't look too line art heavy. So I also wanted to mention that at this point in the drawing, I didn't really think about what kind of lighting I will do. And I wanted to mention that I think it's a really good way of going about things where I didn't really think about how I wanted this portrait to be lit, but I did realize that I kind of wanted to be dramatic, and so I went and found a reference photo. Actually, it was suggested to me by my good friend. But yeah, so she sent me this cool photo with super dramatic lighting, and I loved it, so I decided to use it as the reference for lighting. I don't generally go about the process this way. And if the lighting that I'm going for is super straightforward, I will just wing it. But in this case, I want it to be more dramatic and more specific, so I figured the best way to go about that is to pick a reference. And I was just gonna say that I think it's a really good thing to do to figure out what you want to draw first, draw it, at least sketch it, and have a thumbnail, and then look for a reference later. Because I know that if I looked for a reference before even starting the drawing, it would have greatly influenced how the drawing was going to go. And overall, I think I like to retain a certain amount of creativity / control over the pose, initially at least. And so finding some references after you've already established all the basics of your drawing or painting is the best way to go. So as you can see, my process is pretty much the same, and I'm just gonna go in about a little bit more detail about how I break down the lighting and shadows specifically. So the first sub-step of lighting is I do some quick gradients to tone down the local colors depending on the scene. So as you can see, this reference photo is pretty dark, and so I needed to mute the portrait that I had on the sides, and so I did a few quick gradients. I mostly use dark red for shadows, and also added a little bit of blue because I thought it was a nice touch as in the reference photos. So that was the very first layer that I did, and then which is set to multiply at maybe about 50-60%. I'm not sure, maybe you can see it in the video. I already kind of missed talking about the step as it was happening, but the current step that you're looking at is the most time consuming, and it is the lighting pass or shadow pass number 1. So this is a step that I concentrate on the most because I try to get as much information in as possible in this one step, which makes the process a lot faster for me. So in this step, I aim to essentially get as close as to what I want the result to be as possible, just using a single layer. So how I do this is I set it as I set the silhouette of the character as the reference layer, and then I use the shadow pass number 1 as a clipping mask so that it doesn't go over the edges. And in this particular case, since the lighting was pretty dark, I used maybe like 68% opacity, and of course, as usual, I use like a dark red color set to multiply. So as you can see, I established all the shapes and went in with like a crude regular, I don't know how to put, like a paintbrush. I used a very typical brush. I think it was just like a hard edge solid brush with some opacity, transparency, pressure, sensitivity, whatever. So I used that to lay down the basics of what I saw in the reference, and then I use a gouache blender to blend it all out. So I'll do that a couple of times, and then when it starts to come together, I will zoom in and get into details. So essentially, on this one single layer, I can get the majority of the shadows down, and it actually looks pretty decent by the end. And so afterwards, it's just a matter of adding a little more tweaks here and there. But yeah, as you can see, the only things that I use are the flat standard solid brush, as I mentioned, the gouache blender, just default settings in Clip Studio, and an eraser, and that's about it. It's more than enough to get a general sense of the lighting, and I think that's what makes this process so fast compared to painting, because in painting you're not really doing one step at a time and breaking down the process. You're kind of doing everything at the same time, and although the result might be different and it might be something you're looking for my purposes, given the limited time that I have in my schedule, this process works super well, and it's very easy to understand and kind of keep organized in my head while I'm working. So I find it a lot less daunting, unlike regular painting that is lineless, which is a lot more complicated and very, very difficult for me to start because I just find it super intimidating. But yeah, so as you can see at this point, I have moved on to the second shadow pass, and I didn't want my portrait to look quite as dark as the reference photo, but I did want to capture the same type of mysterious, half the face hidden in the shadow thing with a lot of contrast where the light hits the eye. So in the second shadow pass, I just basically strengthened the darks and went to a little bit more detail with the hair and such. And using the reference really helped, but I wanted to circle back to the line art. So when using a reference, especially for a lineless painting, from previous experience, I found that it's really difficult to not have the portrait of whoever you're drawing slowly start to lose the resemblance to the character and look more and more like the reference. So this is actually a pretty big reason why the line work helped me so much, because I was constrained to not go outside of the lines that I've put down, the edges, the borders of the face, and to keep the features where they're supposed to be. And that's exactly what helped me retain the initial facial features of the character without having him blend like start to look like the reference photo. I don't know if I did a very good job explaining that, but I honestly think that the line art is super key when it comes to that, because using a reference can be kind of like a mindless experience because so much information is right there for you to just grab and use at your disposal. So it can sometimes be a thing where I will turn off my brain and just, you know, copy the reference. But in this particular case, especially since I'm also doing the very divided layer approach and I'm only doing one step at a time, so just the shadows, and then later on I'll be doing just the highlights, I think it actually helps me to break down and really understand what I'm doing and organize it better so I can replicate the process later on without using a reference. So yeah, that's just something that I wanted to mention. But yeah, as you can see, I added a lot more darker areas to the hair and kind of focused on that little the piece of hair that you see is heavily lit or brightly lit. I wanted to create a little bit of a leading line to the face, sorry, to the eye that you can see on the left hand side. So that was kind of my decision making process there. And yeah, so at this point we're pretty much at the last step, which is just adding some small hairs, and this is the most fun step because I just really get to polish the little details that I want and add little highlights into the eyes and everything. I'm actually so happy with how the eye lighting turned out, and I'm so happy to be able to have done this with layers. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I've tried painting before where everything was kind of on one layer, and then after the first layer of basic colors and such, then all you do is like make another layer on top and add more and more paint overs. But I just always found that process to be so confusing, and fixing anything seemed like such a daunting thing because it's like figuring out which layer this paint over is on, etc, etc, and then but if everything is on the same layer, then it's like you really risk ruining something in the proximity of the part that you're trying to fix. You know what I'm talking about. So yeah, that's why I thought it would be kind of hopefully useful to you guys to share a more detailed explanation of how I approach this type of painting or rendering, whatever you might want to call it, coloring, I guess. So yeah, I think the results are actually pretty good for what it is, considering the fact that there's so many layer separations and the fact that it's very neat. Like I could get rid of the entirety of the shadows by just turning off 3 layers, and sometimes it's even just two. So yeah, I think it's a pretty efficient process. So I mean, that's pretty much all I can say about the process at this point, and I really hope that you guys found it helpful. I know that I haven't really made real-time videos recently, but I'm really planning to get back into that. It's been just such a busy few weeks, and I had like a really slow start to the year, but I'm really hoping to get back to the types of videos that I did before, where they're just like long sketch with me or some sort of real-time sketching video with a pen. I haven't even done that much lately in my sketchbook, but yeah, I'm planning to do a video soon to kind of give you guys an update on what I have been up to and what I am up to these days. And I was thinking of maybe starting to do some vlogs, because that might help me keep track of my progress on my personal projects, because I might have mentioned before that this year I'm really looking to transition into no freelance and just working on my own personal stuff. So yeah, I was thinking maybe doing vlogs would really help with that. You guys let me know if you want to see me do more vlogs, and yeah, that's about it. And oh yeah, I guess I wanted to mention that for the last step that you see here, I did bring the drawing, which I fully did in Clip Studio Paint. Up until this point, I did bring it into Photoshop later on because the background was really bothering me and I didn't really know what to do with it, and it's much faster for me to do like layer styles, just like texturizing and all that other stuff, because I'm so used to doing it in Photoshop. I figured I might as well just bring it into Photoshop and do that. So I just brought in a couple of textures to give it more depth, and I really like how the background turned out. I think it gave it a better atmosphere, and I also color corrected a little bit, changed the color of the frame, as you can see, etc. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. I just went in and tweaked some things about the face, because every time I looked at it, like, I took some breaks while I was working on this because I was doing a bunch of other stuff at the time too, and every time I came back to it, I saw something that I hadn't noticed before that I wanted to fix. So I think it is good to step away. I'm so used to doing a piece in one go that this was actually a good experience, because I started it on a Friday and then ended up finishing it on a Monday. So yeah, I wanted to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and please leave a comment down below of what kind of content you want to see next, and if you'd like to see me do some vlogs. And generally, I would love to just get more feedback from you guys and talk to you about whatever, and kind of get back to building a community. I feel like I've been away for so long. But yeah, I'm gonna do more Q&A videos as well, because there's still a bunch of questions that I haven't answered from the last time I asked. But yeah, and if you want to see more frequent updates from me, I am on Instagram, a little bit more active there, so there's also that. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and I'm really looking forward to making more videos in the future, and hopefully at a better schedule. So okay, bye guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye. And thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, which really makes it much easier for me to devote more time to YouTube. Link in the description.